Mara Thorne kept the request line open out of habit, not hope. The tower was buried deep in pine and static. No cell service, no guests, just a girl, a signal, and a sky without stars. She flipped a switch. Music faded. Dead air returned. The booth smelled like dust and wires. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, barely brighter than moonlight. The forest outside pressed against the glass like a forgotten thought. Then the phone rang, twice. No caller ID, just the dull green glow on the cradle. She answered with a lazy greeting. The voice said her name, not a question, a statement. Then it laughed like her mother used to before the accident. The music feed reset itself. The mic light turned red on its own. The line was still open, and now the voice was breathing. Mara Thorne had never believed in ghosts. Not really. Not the kind that clung to sheets or rattled chains in attics, but the kind that lived in repetition, sounds on loop, places out of time, voices where no voices should be, those she respected. Station WZUR was full of them. It had been humming since 1972, buried in a thicket of pine trees 40 miles from anything resembling a town. Its signal barely reached past the tree line, but on still nights its dead air seemed to breathe. She worked the midnight slot because nobody else wanted it. Intern credit, free access to the studio, and the thrill of being completely, dangerously alone. That was the bargain. Her only companions were the equipment racks stacked like tombstones behind glass, the long cables that slithered under the floor, and the analog wall clock that ticked too loud in the quiet. It was just her, the hum of electricity, and the forest pressing in like a held breath. Her playlist was loaded with ambient tracks, loops, and drones. Things with names like Mechanical Prayer and Deep Vein Hum. She leaned back in the chair, headphones around her neck, letting the slow throb of bass lines fill the booth. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago. She did not remember drinking it. She was not even sure she had brought it in. The request line was dead. Always had been. The tower's landline had been decommissioned years ago, and all requests came through an app nobody used. But the phone was still there. Pale yellow plastic, curved receiver, a rotary wheel long since replaced with push buttons. It sat at the far end of the desk, disconnected, dusty, silent. She liked the way it looked. Old tech had soul, or something close to it. She was adjusting a gain level when the bulb in the cradle glowed green. No hum. Just a cold, perfect glow that had not existed a moment before. Then the bell rang. Twice. Sharp, like a breath drawn between teeth. The sound did not belong here. It was not digital. It was not modern. It belonged to another era, another voice. She picked it up before thinking. The plastic felt warmer than expected. Her name came through the line immediately. Not a question, a fact. Spoke with ease, as if said 100 times before. Her full name, middle initial, proper enunciation. Her hand tightened on the receiver. The voice shifted then, said her brother's name, said it in his voice. Not the voice he had when he disappeared last winter. The voice he had when they were small and afraid of thunder. Her stomach turned. She tried to speak, but the line only deepened. The voice changed again. It became her grandmother's laugh, then her own voice, but slower, weeping. The sound of her crying alone, a sound she had never shared. The on-air light turned red on its own. She had not touched the fader. The mic was open, broadcasting silence, broadcasting breath. She tried to mute it. The board resisted. Buttons refused to press. The control panel blinked in unreadable patterns. Then the static came, not from the speakers, from the air. It filled the booth like smoke. Her ears popped. Her skin prickled. Every LED on the console turned off. The phone remained warm in her hand. The voice was whispering now, but the words were wrong, reversed, drowned. Ancient. She stood. The lights above flickered. The booth glass darkened. Her reflection vanished. In its place, the hallway outside became clearer. Something stood there, still, just out of reach. A shape not yet formed. It did not knock. It waited. The hallway had been empty earlier. She had locked the outer door. Only she had the key. Yet the shadow behind the glass stretched longer than her own. It shifted when she breathed. It mirrored nothing. The receiver in her hand grew heavier. It began to pulse, a soft throb, like a heartbeat. She tried to drop it, but her hand would not let go. Her fingers had locked around the plastic as if fused. Her arm trembled. The voice on the line began to sing. A lullaby she barely remembered. One her mother sang the night before she vanished. She turned back toward the console. Every screen displayed a different symbol. None were in English. The playlist was gone. The room buzzed with a pressure that made her jaw ache. The air was thick, humid. She could not tell if it was fear or something more. She pulled the headphones over her ears. They were dead. No signal, no hum, no feedback, just the echo of her own heartbeat and something beneath it. A low moan, buried too deep to name. The studio clock froze. 1:23. The same moment the call began, she reached under the desk for the breaker. Flicked it. No change. Tried again. Still nothing. The voice paused. For a full second there was silence. Then it spoke one more word. Her name, again. But this time from behind her. She spun around. Nothing there. The booth door remained closed, locked, the hallway empty once more. The reflection returned to the glass, but her own face blinked out of sync. For 1 second too long, her eyes stared back from inside the glass, unmoving. The booth smelled like something burned. Behind her, the analog phone crackled. The receiver still glowed. The voice had not finished. Then came the sound. Soft, uneven. A slow, deliberate knock on the control room door. The knock did not echo. It was soft, like bone tapping against old wood. Not forceful enough to demand entry, just enough to confirm presence. Mara stood frozen in the booth. The receiver still clutched against her ear, though the voice had gone silent. The phone no longer glowed. The air around it had turned cold and still. She lowered the handset slowly and returned it to the cradle. The booth lights pulsed once, faintly, then dimmed again. Her breath clouded the glass, though the temperature in the room had not changed. The studio's heating system hummed beneath the floor, oblivious to what had just occurred. Everything looked exactly as it had an hour before, except now she was no longer sure the room belonged to her. The hallway remained empty. No shadow, no visitor, no evidence of the knock. But she had heard it, not imagined it. She knew the difference. Her ears rang faintly. A high tone just above hearing, like a tuning fork held too long. She stepped out of the booth. The corridor smelled like dust and pine needles. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, one flickering near the emergency exit. She passed the old corkboard lined with yellowed flyers, open mic nights from the 90s, missing posters for long-forgotten cats, faded tape clinging to nothing. The silence made her footsteps too loud. She reached the control room door. It was closed, same as before. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. But the handle felt wrong. Slightly warm. Slightly damp. She opened it slowly. The room was empty. Everything sat as it should. Meters flickered with low-level signal. The backup drives blinked in steady rhythm. The security monitor showed 4 camera angles: front entrance, loading dock, transmitter hallway, and the long gravel path leading to the main gate. All 4 were still, except for the far left frame. Camera 1 showed the booth. She was not in it. She leaned closer, rewound the feed. 2 minutes earlier, it had shown her seated at the console, phone to her ear. Then, in the next frame, she was gone. The chair spun slowly, then stopped. She checked the timestamp. 1:23. Exactly the moment the call began. A cold shiver raced up her back. She scanned forward. No return. The booth remained empty. Yet she had been there. She had just stepped out. She turned her head slowly to look back through the control room window. The booth was empty. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She blinked once, then again. Now she was there, standing in the booth, just as she had been seconds ago. Headphones slung around her neck. Eyes locked forward, staring directly at her. She spun back toward the monitor. Still empty. A moment later, the figure in the booth turned, walked out of frame. She heard the back hallway door open. Not the one behind her, the one leading to the basement stairs. Mara ran. Her shoes pounded the old tile, echoing louder than she thought possible. She reached the hallway junction just as the door to the basement clicked shut. A breath of stale air greeted her, thick with mold and coal dust. The red exit light above the stairwell blinked once, then died. She hesitated. Basement access was restricted. The transmitter panels were down there, along with decades of archived recordings, old tapes, reels, forgotten showmasters. But the stairs had been blocked off last year after a technician slipped and cracked his spine on the third step. No one was supposed to enter. No one was supposed to be down there. She opened the door. Darkness rolled upward, slow and heavy as if poured from the earth itself. The stairs creaked in protest beneath her weight. Every step she took made the air thicker, the silence deeper. Her phone had no signal. Her flashlight app barely worked. Only the emergency glow tape on the rails guided her path. She reached the bottom landing. Concrete floor. Two closed doors. One marked archives, the other unlabeled, sealed with a bolt latch. Something moved behind the second door. Not loudly, not fast. A scrape, like a foot dragged across cement. Then a pause. Then nothing. She stepped back. The air pressure changed. The kind of shift that warned of something massive shifting in another room. She heard it again, her name. This time not from a phone, not from a speaker, but from the pipes in the wall. Echoed in rust, spoken through iron. Mara. Soft. Hollow. Then again. Mara. But the mouth was moving. Hers was not. She stepped away. Back to the stairs. The moment she turned, something slammed the archive door from the inside. The sound boomed through the floor and walls, shaking dust loose from the rafters. The lights flickered again. Not the soft kind from bad wiring, the violent kind that precedes something breaking. She bolted up the stairs, 2 steps at a time, lungs burning, her heart pounding in time with the echo of her name still trapped in the walls. She burst back into the hallway, slammed the stairwell door shut, and braced it with a chair. Her breath came hard and fast. The radio in the booth buzzed to life without prompting. Her voice came through the speakers. Not a recording, not a clip. Live. It was her voice, speaking from the booth, counting backward from 20. She was no longer in the booth. She stepped forward and watched herself through the glass. Mara was sitting again, wearing her clothes, moving her mouth, but she was standing here, outside. The countdown reached 2. The on-air light turned red, and the mic opened. Mara did not remember stepping back from the glass, but suddenly she was across the hall again, hand pressed against the cool booth window, watching her own body speak. Her double sat calmly at the desk, fingers draped across the console as if she had always belonged there. The countdown had ended. Her mouth was moving without sound. The mic was live. Static hissed faintly through the overhead monitors. Each word the other Mara spoke seemed to twist the air, and though no one else was listening, Mara felt her bones vibrate with every syllable. The figure in the booth glanced up and met her eyes. That was the first true break in the illusion. The stare lasted too long, too directly, and too knowingly. This was not a broadcast accident. This was not a delayed feed. Something was inside that room wearing her face like memory. Its expression did not change, but Mara could feel it smiling. Not on the surface, but in the shape of her own lips, the tilt of her head, and the slackness in her jaw. Whatever was speaking through her mouth was pleased to be heard. She backed away slowly, moving without taking her eyes off the figure behind the glass. Her hands brushed the edge of the control room desk where the monitor still flickered, but now all 4 security feeds had gone dark. No error messages, just black screens like the cameras themselves had blinked out of existence. Her reflection moved with her now. It tracked her steps not through the glass, but through the darkness behind each screen, as if something deep inside them was watching. She did not remember turning them off. She was not sure they had power anymore. She crossed the room and reached the main exit, keying in the station's security code out of instinct. The keypad blinked, then stayed red. She tried again. This time the numbers stuck under her fingers like melted plastic, each one pressing deeper than it should, as if the panel were hollow behind the surface. The system did not beep. It simply ignored her. A soft click came from above. She looked up. The overhead light had burned out, but something still moved in the dark fixture. Not a bug, not a shadow. Something with weight, coiled and waiting. She turned and walked quickly back toward the production hallway, bypassing the studio and heading toward the old vinyl storage room. It had a metal door and no windows, the only space in the building she knew how to barricade. Dust choked the air as she pulled open the door. Inside, the stacks of records rose like stone towers. Her flashlight passed over covers with warped faces, melted titles, and track lists that looked rewritten in red marker. She had never noticed that before. The archive had always been disorganized, but not vandalized, not wrong. She shut the door behind her and dragged a filing cabinet in front of it. The floor creaked faintly beneath her boots. It sounded hollow now, as if something large was moving in the crawl space below. She sat down beside the wall and tried to slow her breath. The silence that followed was not comforting. It felt staged, like the air was holding its breath with her, waiting to see what she would do next. The records did not look like records anymore. Their black grooves shone like wet eyes, angled just enough to catch the reflection of her flashlight no matter where she turned it. In the corner, an old radio stood on a metal shelf, unplugged but still humming faintly. Its needle moved on its own, skipping across the dial but never settling. Her voice returned, not from the booth, not from memory, from the speaker. This time it was laughing, quiet, subtle. Her own laugh looped and layered until it no longer sounded human. She unplugged the radio, but the sound continued. It was not playing from the device. It was playing from the air. Mara stood and moved deeper into the storage room. The shelves pressed closer the farther she went. Her flashlight dimmed despite fresh batteries. Somewhere above her, metal groaned. A heavy object slid across the roof of the station, slow and steady as though searching for a crack in the structure. The laughter faded. In its place came whispering, low and measured, like a conversation behind a closed door. It was her voice again, repeating names. Her brother, her mother, her own, in every variation, spoken in every tone, cried, screamed, whispered, sighed. The shelves ended in a blank wall that should not have been there. She had walked this room dozens of times. There was never a back wall, just more shelves, more crates. But now the corridor ended. The wall was smooth and pulsing faintly like something breathing beneath a skin of plaster. She touched it and felt warmth. It beat faintly. The whispering grew louder. She turned and ran. The records did not fall, but they turned. Sleeves rotated on their shelves as she passed, always facing her as though watching her flight. She reached the front of the room and pushed hard against the filing cabinet. It slid easily now, as if the door behind it had been opened already. The hallway outside was dark, silent. She stepped into it slowly, unsure if she was alone. The booth was lit again. The figure was gone, and across the hall, the old analog phone had been moved. It now sat directly in front of the studio entrance on a chair that had not been there before. It rang once, then stopped. Then the hallway lights began to blink, one at a time, starting at the far end and moving closer. Mara did not wait for the last hallway light to blink out. She turned away from the studio and headed for the back corridor, her footsteps muffled against the old carpet runner that stretched toward the loading bay. The building felt longer than before. Each hallway seemed to have grown a little wider, the ceiling a little lower, the walls more reluctant to let sound pass. The familiar hum of the HVAC system had gone silent. No air flowed through the vents. Even her breath seemed to move too slowly, as though the atmosphere had thickened just to keep her in place. The loading bay door stood half open, rusted from rain and disuse, its chain pulley broken years ago. She ducked under it and stepped into the night. The air outside was no better. It clung to her skin, moist and bitter, with the scent of rotting pine needles and damp soil rising from the gravel drive. Trees circled the station like sentries. Their branches did not move in the breeze, because there was no breeze. Even the insects had gone quiet. No buzz, no clicks, just stillness. She started down the path toward the transmitter tower, hoping to find a signal, a flicker of reception, anything to connect her to the outside world. Her phone remained dead, not just without signal, but truly dark, as if the battery had been drained by something deeper than use. When she passed the emergency light pole near the generator shed, it turned on for half a second, then popped with a faint hiss and went dark again. Shadows regrouped around her feet. The transmitter loomed ahead, a skeletal lattice against the starless sky. Normally, red lights blinked at its peak to warn aircraft, but now it was just a black spike stabbing the clouds. The metal beneath her fingertips felt warm when she reached out, like something recently alive. She walked around the base, checking the power feeds and signal boxes, but found nothing out of place except for a strange humming beneath the ground. It resonated just below the surface, steady and deep, like a distant engine turning beneath the dirt. She crouched and placed her hand to the gravel. The vibration was real, not imagined, not subtle, rhythmic like a heartbeat from something buried. She stood up and backed away slowly, scanning the woods for any sign of movement. The pines stood in silence, but their silhouettes seemed to lean ever so slightly toward the station. She felt the urge to look back, but did not. Not yet. When she returned to the back lot, the booth was lit again. She had not turned it on. The analog phone was gone from the hallway chair. In its place sat a reel-to-reel recorder, one of the old models from the archive room. Its reels were spinning slowly, though no power cable trailed from its side. A faint hiss came from its speaker. Then her voice emerged again. This time, it was a confession. She spoke of things she had never said aloud. Guilt about her brother, the dream she had after her mother disappeared, a secret she had buried so deep she had forgotten it until now. Her voice was calm and measured, as if reading from a script. But each word cut with precision, peeling back layers she had not meant to expose. She unplugged the recorder, but it kept spinning. Then it began to rewind. Violently, the reels spun backward so fast they blurred, and from the speaker came a different sound, a chorus of voices, all layered, all speaking at once. Some were hers, some were not. Some wept, some screamed. One simply repeated her name over and over in a voice made of static. She backed away and re-entered the studio lobby. The floor tiles shifted beneath her feet as if something beneath them was no longer content to sleep. She pressed herself against the wall, unsure where to go next. Every hallway now felt like a trap. Every doorway had changed shape. The building was no longer architecture, it was becoming something else. The lights above flickered one by one, not randomly, but as if they were following her. She took the hallway toward the emergency broadcast closet. It was one of the only doors in the building that required a manual key, which she still had clipped to her lanyard. The door looked normal until she reached it. Then, as she pulled out the key, the metal handle changed. It bent, shifted. It curled away from her grip like something organic, recoiling from touch. She forced the key in anyway and twisted. The lock resisted, then snapped open with a sound that felt too wet. Inside, the emergency closet was cold. The air smelled like old recordings, magnetic tape, dry paper, warm plastic. She flipped the breaker inside, hoping to kill power to the main broadcast tower. The switches clicked, but nothing changed. The red on-air light was still burning in the booth. The mic was still open. The station was no longer running on her rules. She turned to leave and found the door gone. The closet no longer had a doorframe, just wall. Behind her, the radio inside the room switched on. It played a voice she had never heard before. Not hers, not family, something older. It spoke in phrases that did not belong to any language she knew, but she understood the meaning in her bones. It was not a message. It was a welcome. The light bulb in the ceiling shattered. Glass fell like rain. And something moved behind the walls. The walls did not just shift behind her. They breathed. The sensation was unmistakable. Plaster expanding, contracting, exhaling a damp warmth that touched the back of her neck with the weight of breath. Mara pressed her palms flat against the far corner of the broadcast closet, searching for seams or cracks, anything that hinted at where the door had gone. There were none. The drywall pulsed faintly with a heartbeat rhythm, slow and deliberate, and with each beat she felt more like a guest inside her own skin. She turned toward the single shelf along the back wall. It held a coiled broadcast cable, a rusted can of cleaning solvent, and a tangled mess of unmarked reel tapes, old brown, flaking at the edges. One tape sat alone, centered perfectly, as if placed there recently. It bore no label, but the edge of the plastic reel was etched with a word she knew: Thorn. Her last name, carved, not printed. Jagged. Fresh. She picked it up carefully. The plastic was warm. The closet's floor beneath her feet gave a hollow groan, and dust rained from the light fixture above. A draft slipped through the shelf frame behind the coiled cables. She followed it with her fingers and found a crack just wide enough to pry loose. The panel slid sideways with a reluctant scrape, revealing a narrow maintenance tunnel that smelled like mildew and magnetized dust. Her only option was forward. She crawled into the dark, dragging the reel tape behind her, guided by the faint green glow of emergency paint strips along the floor. The tunnel curved sharply, cutting beneath the studio at a slant that dipped farther than she expected. The deeper she went, the colder it became. Not the natural cold of stone or forgotten space, but the dry, still cold of something waiting, the kind of cold that felt like agreement. At the end of the tunnel was a hatch. She twisted it open, and it led into a sub-basement storage room she had never seen. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, but none of them had handles. Their fronts were covered in old audio paper logs, each sheet stamped with call signs she did not recognize and names that had long since faded. In the center of the room stood a table. Atop it, a reel-to-reel player was already powered on, a strip of tape threaded through its spindles. Her name was printed on a placard beside it. First and last. The font matched no known label maker. She had not given permission for any of this. No part of her life had been willingly archived here. Still, her hand moved without asking, placing the tape from her pocket onto the machine and threading it into place. The reels clicked. The machine began to play. No music, no static. Only her. Not her voice, but her thoughts. Spoken aloud. Not read, not remembered, spoken as if her mind had been recorded in real time without her knowing. She heard her first lie, her first fear. The moment she wished her brother would disappear. The wish she made the night before he did. Every flicker of shame she had ever buried was now unwinding across magnetic tape for no one and everyone to hear. She pressed stop. The machine did not respond. The tape kept spinning faster now. The whispers returned, not from the speakers but from the room itself. They came from behind the file drawers, from beneath the floor tiles, from the seams in the ceiling. All around her, voices layered over each other like frost on glass. She heard her grandmother's lullaby, warped and slowed to a crawl. She heard her mother's voice calling her in the dark, the way she had the night she vanished. She heard herself whispering, "Let me out," from the walls. She backed away. The filing cabinet shook. Not rattled, shook, like they were alive with vibration. One drawer popped open suddenly, and from it spilled not papers but reels, hundreds of them. All blank, unlabeled, unwound. They hissed as they hit the floor, coiling around her feet like magnetic serpents. One wrapped her ankle. Another climbed her leg. She kicked them free and ran back to the hatch. The tunnel had changed. It was longer now. Narrower. The walls breathed harder, their pulsing rhythm in sync with her heart. She crawled through on hands and knees, fighting the sensation of being swallowed. The emergency glow tape had dimmed to near invisible. Her palms ached from contact with the rough floor. Each time her knee struck the metal bolts along the edges, she felt something warm trickle beneath her jeans. She did not stop. She emerged somewhere else. Not the closet, not the basement, the booth. But not her booth. This one was pristine. Too pristine. The glass was spotless. The equipment was polished. The equipment was polished. The chair was upright. The mic light was off. It looked untouched, unused, yet she was in it. Outside the glass, the station was dark. No emergency lights. No hallway fixtures. Only moonlight, pale and colorless, casting impossible shadows from angles that did not match any windows. The analog phone sat on the desk, still dusty, still lifeless, until it rang. Once, then again. The glow beneath the receiver turned green. She stared at it. Her fingers twitched. She did not want to answer. She also knew she would, because this time the voice would not speak. This time, it would listen. The light turned red. The mic opened by itself. And somewhere beyond the booth, down in the guts of the station, a recording began. Mara did not reach for the phone right away. Her hand hovered above it as though her body recognized some invisible heat radiating from the old receiver that her mind had not yet registered. The green light beneath the cradle pulsed slowly, a heartbeat encoded in circuitry long since deemed obsolete. There was a weight in the air around her, not physical pressure but something more intimate, as if the station itself had turned inward, folding its walls just slightly to keep her inside. The booth, once familiar, now felt sculpted to fit her unease. Even the chair at the console had adjusted its angle toward her, anticipating use before she had even sat down. No louder than before, yet far more personal, as if this particular ring had been reserved for her alone. There was no doubt left in her mind that answering it would change something fundamental. Not about the station, not about the broadcast. About her? Still she sat, placing her fingers gently on the receiver, feeling its smooth, cool surface as though testing the boundary between two worlds. When she lifted it, the booth did not respond with feedback or static. Instead, the red on-air light flared to life again, flooding the room with a soft, infernal glow. No voice greeted her. No whispers returned. Just breath. Long, slow, deliberate breaths, each exhale precise enough to count. Mara waited, trying to steady her own breathing so she could isolate the sound on the other end. Whoever or whatever was there seemed to be listening. She could not explain how she knew, but she felt its attention like a hand on the side of her face, not touching her skin, but cupped just near it, always hovering. It knew she had returned. It had been waiting for her to pick up again, not to speak, but to stay on the line. This was not a conversation. It was a transaction. The monitors across the console came to life one by one, each screen displaying waveforms that did not match anything she was broadcasting. The shapes were jagged and sharp, layered like overlapping screams compressed into visual data. None of the meters moved with her voice. None reacted to environmental sound. The input was coming from somewhere else entirely, some signal looped back through space or memory, transmitting things that had never been recorded. One waveform pulsed in time with the breathing. Another began to scroll, revealing faint text embedded in the peaks, words she recognized but had never written. The phrases were pieces of journal entries she had burned years ago, lines from letters she had never sent, secrets she had only whispered in dreams. She dropped her hand from the console and let the phone rest between her ear and shoulder. Her legs felt heavy, not from exhaustion but from something more permanent, like the gravity in the room had increased. The booth was holding her now. Not trapping her, not quite, but keeping her. Every surface seemed fractionally closer. The glass no longer reflected her. Instead, it captured the faint impression of movement behind her, like shadows passing behind a curtain. Her breath misted briefly, though the room was not cold. It was the kind of temperature found inside a forgotten mouth. Then, the voice returned. But it was not just one. It was all of them at once. Her brother's cry from the last voicemail he left before he vanished. Her mother's humming, off-key and soft, recorded during an old home video that no longer existed. Her own voice repeated back to her in fractured syllables from a school presentation she had not remembered giving. And beneath it all, something deeper, not human, not mimicking. Something that used voices the way a musician uses instruments, layering them to make meaning. The voices wove a pattern, not linear, but spiraling. They were not communicating in sentences, but in tone, in memory, in personal history. The voice was building a version of her made of sound. A broadcast only she could interpret. The reel-to-reel player behind her clicked on again. The spools turned without tape. And still audio played. Her laughter at age 9. Her scream at 16. The moment her name was called for the first time in a crowded hospital waiting room, the lights outside the booth turned off in rapid sequence, one after another, until only the red glow of the on-air sign remained. The voice lowered, deepened, and spoke again, not with a specific phrase, but with a command buried in emotion. She felt it in her chest before she heard it in her ear. It told her to open the channel, not figuratively. The station was no longer enough. The voice wanted to be heard beyond this place. It wanted release. Mara looked to the master transmitter switch beneath the console. She had never touched it. The station manager had said it was outdated and non-functional. Now it blinked green, not idle. Ready. She hesitated. The phone in her hand pulsed once, then again. A third time, harder. From the speaker a new sound emerged, metal scraping metal, steady and rhythmic, not from a tape, not from the console. From the floor. Something was being dragged down the hallway, something that wanted to be closer. Her other hand moved toward the switch without instruction. The voice in her ear remained patient, not coercing, not pleading, waiting. Her fingers brushed the transmitter toggle, and then something exhaled inside the booth that was not her. Mara's fingers hovered above the transmitter switch, her breath shallow, eyes locked on the blinking green indicator that had no business being active. The booth had fallen into an unnatural quiet, one so complete that her heartbeat felt like an intrusion. Even the electric buzz that usually threaded through the equipment had vanished. The silence did not feel passive. It felt conditional, granted to her for as long as she obeyed. The moment stretched beyond her sense of time, each second thickening until it no longer belonged to the night. She did not remember leaning forward, but the distance between her hand and the switch had shrunk. Her fingers twitched slightly, like her body was being guided by a rhythm she could not hear. Behind her, the reel-to-reel tape machine slowed to a crawl, its spools grinding almost imperceptibly, as if waiting for the next cue. The green light beneath the analog phone turned amber for the first time. A soft, static hum emerged from the console, not from the monitors, but from inside the paneling, like something was coiled within the wires and listening. She stared through the booth glass into the control room. It had become a darkened shrine of flickering reflections and distorted angles. The lights overhead had dimmed into reddish filaments that cast long, exaggerated shadows. None of them moved in sync with her body. She tried shifting slightly in her seat, only to find the shadow in the corner did not respond. It stayed still, fixed in the shape of someone seated at the edge of the console, head tilted just enough to seem curious. The voice had not spoken since the breath, but its presence had thickened in the air. It occupied the gaps between sound, nestling itself beneath her skin, adjusting her heartbeat until it matched the booth's invisible pulse. She felt like a transmitter now. Not a person. A piece of equipment with flesh wrapped around it. Her memories had begun to bend at the edges. Faces from her childhood returned with unfamiliar expressions. Places she had never visited flickered in her mind like half-watched films. And somewhere inside her, a single phrase repeated itself, "Open the signal." The silence that followed was thicker than before, pressing in on her like static trying to become solid. She had no illusions about what would happen if she flipped the transmitter. She knew the voice would go beyond the tower. It would reach past the woods, past the town, into whatever frequency waited to receive it. She also knew she had already heard it, long before tonight. Not through the station, not through the station, not through technology. In dreams. In walls. In moments of silence when she had mistaken the absence of noise for peace. Her hand closed around the switch. The plastic was warm, almost soft, as though it had been handled recently. The label beneath it, once worn and unreadable, had cleared itself. It now read Emergency Signal Override. That label had never been there before. She would have noticed. The station manager would have mentioned it. This was not a function she had been trained to use, yet the switch existed now, real and waiting. From outside the booth, the dragging sound returned. Metal against tile. Deliberate. Rhythmic. Something was moving through the station. Not quickly, not quietly, but with the kind of patience that comes from knowing it will arrive exactly when it should. She turned her head slowly toward the door. Nothing appeared in the hallway. No figure. No shadow. It approached in intervals, pausing every few seconds as if to let her anticipate the next scrape. The booth's walls trembled faintly with each pass. Her chair vibrated just enough to be noticed. and the red on-air sign flared brighter, casting a halo of color that painted her reflection across the console surface. The voice returned, not through the phone, not from the speaker, from inside her own chest. It was not using her vocal cords, it bypassed them. The words arrived in her mind fully formed, like thoughts she had not authored. You brought me this far. Let me finish. She did not respond aloud. She did not have to. The voice already knew her answer. Still, it waited. The switch remained in her hand, unflipped. Her knuckles had gone pale from tension, though she had not noticed until now. Every breath she took felt like a risk, as if the act of inhaling might unbalance the equation that kept the voice contained. Then the hallway lights began to blink again, but this time they moved away from her. One by one, the bulbs snapped off, cascading toward the rear stairwell. The dragging sound followed them, retreating slowly like the station itself had changed its mind. She was no longer the one being approached. She was being left behind. Her chair creaked slightly as she adjusted her weight. The green light beneath the phone faded to black. The waveform monitors across the console dimmed. Even the voice withdrew. Only the on-air light remained, a final beacon of attention. She released the switch, her fingers aching as blood returned to the tips. The booth no longer vibrated. The shadows had returned to normal, hers included. But something was not finished. She heard the main door at the far end of the station open. The sound was unmistakable. Hinges that had not turned in years groaning under use. A gust of outside air rushed through the corridor, carrying the scent of pine and something older, damp stone and burnt copper. She stood slowly, leaving the console behind, stepping toward the booth door with uncertain feet. She reached for the handle. From somewhere beyond the entrance, just out of sight, a soft, melodic voice began to hum. It was her mother's voice. And it was getting closer. Mara's hand remained on the booth door handle, unmoving as the humming grew louder from the corridor beyond. It was not just a melody, it was a reconstruction. Each note threaded through memory and sensation, arranged in the precise order her mother used to sing when lulling her to sleep. It had no lyrics, only tone, but the emotion embedded in it hit with surgical precision. The booth behind her remained eerily still, as if its equipment had been turned off mid-broadcast. But she could feel the on-air light still glowing, even though it no longer shone against the console. The signal had not ended. It had simply become invisible. She pulled the door open slowly, not because she wanted to confront the sound, but because the space between her and it had already collapsed. The hallway outside was not empty, but it held no figures either. Instead, it was full of presence. The air was dense with intention, as though something immense had knelt just beyond her line of sight and whispered its shape into the building's foundation. The humming continued without breath. No pauses, no tremble, only relentless melody sliding between frequencies just below understanding. As she stepped forward, her shoes made no sound against the floor. The station's structure had changed again. Walls bowed slightly inward, and door frames leaned just enough to force her body into discomfort. The lights had not returned, but the dark had shifted tone from oppressive to observant. It now watched her with passive expectation, like a crowd holding its breath before the final note. She passed the control room, which now stood open, monitors still dead, but their screens coated in a fine layer of condensation. Words had been traced into the moisture, names, phrases, some she recognized, others she had only ever thought privately. Further down, the hallway opened into the station's reception area, a room she barely used. It had been remodeled last year and abandoned just as quickly when the budget ran dry. Now it stood in perfect condition. The rug had been vacuumed, the couch cushions realigned. A steaming cup of coffee sat on the desk, though she had not brewed it. The smell was unmistakable. Her mother's roast, the kind with too much cinnamon, served in a chipped mug that had vanished years ago. The humming stopped. Mara turned slowly, knowing that breaking the silence might fracture something important. Behind her, the door to the outside world was wide open. The pine forest beyond shimmered faintly with silver mist, and a path had been cleared through the underbrush. Not a trail of footprints, but a deliberate clearing, like trees had been asked to move aside. The moon hung low and wrong, casting too much light on nothing at all. No stars accompanied it. No wind stirred the branches. She stepped outside, compelled by something deeper than logic, guided by the rhythm that had first entered her ear through the receiver. The air tasted electric, not like ozone before a storm, but like the memory of sound after it has stopped playing. Each step forward pulled her farther from the version of herself that had once just wanted intern credit, solitude, and a few quiet hours on the graveyard shift. That version had never truly belonged here. But this one, the one who listened, had always been meant for this path. She passed the old satellite dish near the edge of the tree line. Its surface had been polished, though no one had cleaned it in years. A single wire trailed from its base into the earth, pulsing faintly with red light. Somewhere beneath her feet, the signal moved, not in pulses or bursts, but in a slow, continuous stream. It was not broadcasting outward anymore. It was broadcasting inward, into her. The trees opened further ahead, revealing a small clearing she did not remember. In the center sat a single chair, molded from black plastic and cracked along the edges. An analog headset rested on the seat, the kind used before digital interfaces replaced physical toggles. A reel-to-reel recorder stood beside it, already turning. No one was there to operate it. The tape spun without tension, and still it recorded. She moved toward it without deciding to. Her body aligned with its presence naturally, as if following the steps of a dance she had never learned but had always known. She sat in the chair. The headset fit perfectly. The reel-to-reel clicked once, then silence. No voice filled her ear. No instruction, no threat. Instead, her own breath began to loop, each inhale and exhale recorded, then played back, then layered with another. Soon the breathing became words, then the words became sentences. None of them spoken aloud. They were her thoughts, made audible. Every fear, every secret, every moment of guilt she had pressed into the corners of her memory. They were arranged with surgical precision, laid bare not for punishment but for preservation. The forest listened. The ground listened. And the station, perched just beyond the clearing, pulsed with steady light through the trees. The signal did not end that night, and Mara was never reported missing. The booth still glows red after midnight. And sometimes, during the quietest hours, when the static stretches too long between songs, a voice can be heard, just briefly, reciting names you have never told anyone. Then the mic cuts. And the line falls silent again.